You're listening to the Gulf Stream, where we talk to fascinating guests that want to make the Gulf of Mexico, and moreover, the world, a more sustainable and more beautiful place. Don't worry about getting bogged down in scientific jargon or academic lecturing. On the Gulf Stream, we break down complex ideas into simple, yet intriguing subjects that will help you be more informed and perhaps inspire you to create a better environment for all of us. After all, it takes people like you to make a difference in some of the toughest issues facing the Earth today. Welcome to the Gulf Stream.
This is Jennifer Pollack, Endowed Chair for Coastal Conservation and Restoration at the Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. I stepped in as host for this episode of the Gulf Stream podcast for a conversation with Brad Lomax. Brad is the founder of Corpus Christi's Water Street Restaurants. He is Texas's first oyster farmer, and he is the owner of the Texas Oyster Ranch. In this episode, Brad and I talk about his history in Corpus Christi, surfing the Texas coast, the Sink Your Shucks oyster shell recycling program, and what it was like to receive the first ever permit to farm oysters in Texas. Enjoy. All right. Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us today on the Gulf Stream podcast.
I'm glad to be here.
I guess I will start by saying that keen listeners to the podcast will notice that this is the first episode with a guest host. Even if they don't know my voice, they definitely can tell that I'm not Dr. David Yaskowitz, who has hosted all of the episodes up to this point before transitioning into his new role at Texas Parks and Wildlife. So let me introduce myself to our listeners.
Sure.
My name is Jennifer Pollack. I'm the Endowed Chair for Coastal Conservation and Restoration here at the Hart Research Institute, and I'm also a professor of marine biology. And our guest of honor today, who we're very excited to talk to, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I don't think that I could do it any justice. Please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Brad Lomax, and I've lived in Corpus Christi actually since 1982. And I'm the founder of Water Street Restaurants and no longer actively involved in that endeavor, running it every day, but still very involved. And I am the first licensed cultivated oyster mariculture farmer in the state of Texas, and I'm a huge fan of Dr. Jenny Pollack and Hart Research and Texas A&M Corpus Christi. So I'm just glad to be here talking to you, Jenny.
Great. Well, we are equally as excited, and we're going to dig into all of those parts about you in our talk this morning. So, all right. So I'd like to start, Brad, by asking you to talk a little bit about your history in Corpus Christi. So my sense is that you have become such a champion of Corpus Christi and the Gulf of Mexico because this place is really your home, and you know the waters of the Gulf sort of flow through your veins. So can you tell us a little bit about your history? So you weren't born in Corpus Christi. Did you get here as soon as you could?
Pretty much so. You know, I grew up in San Antonio, but we had always come to the coast. We called it the coast in my childhood. And in fact, I had an aunt. My Aunt Nell lived over on Brock Street for years. So I was familiar with Corpus and especially Port Aransas and loved it. I mean, I just always have had sea oats and salt water running through my veins. And when I set out to, I graduated from college in San Antonio, and I worked in the restaurant business for a man up there. But when I set out on my own, I moved to Corpus Christi because I want to live here. And that, I'm telling you, in the grand scheme of things, that's a lousy site selection process, but it's just true. I wanted to live in Corpus Christi. I want to have access to the beaches, bays, and lifestyle of the coastal bend.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that it shows in the way that you've really connected this place to all of your businesses. So I would like to talk about your businesses next. So you've started a number of different ventures around Corpus Christi.
Right.
And I think, bars, restaurants,
failures, some good.
We'll talk about your
bad.
successes. But one thing that I think is really special about the things that you've done in Corpus Christi is they all really connect to that sense of place. They all really connect to what Corpus Christi is. And also for tourists who are visiting us and residents who live here, they really give us that local flavor. They're sort of like a defining characteristic of Corpus Christi. So tell us a little bit about how you came about developing your businesses in this way.
Well, in the early 80s, when I came down here, seafood, I mean, this is ancient history to somebody like you, Jenny, but, seafood was not a big part of the dining out diet. But it was coming on, and there were more and more concepts that I saw regionally, nationally, that were serving seafood. I wanted to have a seafood restaurant. And so I love Corpus Christi and I love seafood. So, it's all kind of me-based at this point. And so I developed a menu before I even had a location. I knew I wanted to serve fresh fish. Paul Prudhomme in New Orleans was developing blackened redfish at this time. And frankly, the competition, and not just in Corpus Christi, but in other Texas cities, was fried seafood. And that's what everybody's concept of a seafood restaurant was. And I'm not knocking that. I sell a lot of fried seafood, but we wanted to do something different. So I developed that menu, and it just made sense that, people come to the coast, they come to the coast to taste the flavors of the Gulf of Mexico. So as much as we possibly could, we, blackened redfish. But back before the redfish wars and all that, redfish was a pretty iconic species down here. Same with Gulf of Mexico brown shrimp, the best in the country. And so, it just made sense to develop a Gulf seafood concept. It just so happened that the only place I could get a location was on Water Street. But that was, divine guidance, because water is in everything that we do. I mean, seriously. And so to be on Water Street, once we had that location, there was no doubt what the name of the restaurant was going to be, because it tells what we are, who we are, and where we are in one sentence.
That's so interesting. It sounds very serendipitous, because
it very much was.
For folks who know Corpus Christi or have visited, probably recognize that Water Street is now essentially a destination with multiple businesses there that really honor the Gulf of Mexico and local seafood.
And Corpus Christi. So
another thing that I have noticed about you is that you live this real coastal lifestyle. You're an all-around waterman, surfing, fishing, just sort of enjoying living in the coast. Mm-hmm. How has that influenced the way that you've approached, the way that you've developed your businesses?
Well, that's a good question. I think being called a waterman is the highest compliment you could ever pay me, Jenny. And so thank you for saying that. And there are a lot of others who are more watermanly than I am. But I love that moniker. You love what you're doing, and I love what I'm doing, but what I do in my business life is the same thing as my personal life. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I have a fish restaurant and I love to fish. I love to surf, and we opened a surf museum. And so these things, the concept, the Executive Surf Club, that came from just a group of, middle-aged people with jobs, who sketchy jobs, but who went surfing together. So I don't know. It's just kind of all blended together for me, and I love it. And so that is a water-based concept that was started by a guy who loved the water and the salt water and the salinity and the environment and the wind and the humidity I love all those things. And now the second generation are my kids who have grown up in that environment. My kids were fishing and surfing, and Ben, Richard, and Lizzie all doing those activities from the time they were growing up. And so I don't know, it's hard to define it for me, Jenny, but
it's what felt natural. It sounds like
it still feels very natural. And
I have to say that even though, from your perspective, it might have been sort of a selfish, this is what I like to do, and therefore that's how I developed my restaurants. I'll say from the outside, it also seems sort of like a gift to the community, though, because there are lots of folks born and raised or moved here or visiting here who don't necessarily have the depth of experience with the bays and with the Gulf of Mexico. They don't surf. They maybe have never dipped their toe into the bay. Maybe they haven't gone out on a boat. So to bring them sort of that experience of going to the surf club and seeing the local history of surfing, or going to your restaurant and experiencing what fresh fish come out of our bays, I think that can create a connection that otherwise wouldn't be there. And so that's a really special thing that maybe you haven't recognized, but that I recognize that you have done for this city.
Well, again, thanks. 50% of our business comes from outside of Nueces County. So, half of our business in those restaurants are people who are visiting the area. So, it's just, I've always said, it's really not, our business isn't great because of Water Street. It's been great because of the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
People are coming down here, and we benefit from that. And so it kind of gets back to when Ed Hart, who's a very good customer of mine, I'm old enough and been in business long enough to remember, he come in and eat lunch by himself a couple times a week, and what a fascinating guy. And here's a guy who he always asked me how business was. And because he knew that my business was dependent on how Corpus was. And Corpus is dependent on how the environment is. And so, I'm not going to claim that me and Ed Hart were tight buddies, but I had many conversations with that man. And Ed recognized it. And thus, you're sitting here and I'm sitting here.
Right.
And so I'll tell you how brilliant and how much foresight I have and all that. I just learned from a lot of good people, and Ed was one of them.
That's some pretty interesting foresight of things to come. It sounds like those conversations.
Sure.
So we haven't talked about it yet, but I want to kind of prompt you to talk a little bit about one of your more unique ventures, which is the Texas Surf Museum, which has promoted the legacy of surfing specifically in the coastal bend, but throughout Texas as well.
Sure.
How did that idea come about?
Well, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, and so a lot of this stuff comes from, Jenny, what we can do to make our business better. And so the Water Street block needed an attraction. We had good food at the Oyster Bar and good food and fun times at the Surf Club and the Seafood Company and all that, but we kind of needed an attraction because we figured if we can get people to put foot on our property, we can sell them a cold beer and a plate of fried shrimp. So, and I just, Texas surfing is a story that needed to be told. And that sounds bizarre, but, all the people that started it, most of them are still alive, and they certainly were alive back in 2004 when we did all this. Cecil Laws, who visited Hawaii with his parents and brought surfboards back over here and started renting them on Padre Island. Well, that story, Duke Hanamako is long gone. I mean, the story of the Pacific Coast, some of those guys most of those guys, the founders, are passed. So I wanted to tell that story, and it would be a combination of developing an attraction, a reason for people to come to Water Street Market besides to eat, and just the oxymoron that Texas surf gets attention.
That's true. That's true. I think that people are more familiar, like you're saying, with Hawaii as a surfing destination,
Absolutely.
California as a surfing destination. Sure. And, not all of Texas, I think, is a place that you can surf. So sort of honoring and recognizing and telling people that story in Corpus Christi, I think has been great. I've learned a lot. And I'll say personally, having a husband who shapes surfboards, I also appreciated sort of the arc that you created with the history of surfing all the way to sort of highlighting and showcasing modern day surfing and surfboard makers.
The young guns.
In Texas, yeah.
Well, it's been great and I love it. And I still think it's a great story. And these guys are still with us, and they have and the people from California. All the events we've had down here, and we invite all these big names, and have hosted a lot of big names from the West Coast surfing world, and they say, "Man, your waves stink, but this is the best stoke environment we've ever been in." The people in California are rather blasé and casual about all this stuff, and down here, you get 3-foot wind chop out there, and it's a fist fight to get to the beach. And so I don't know. I love that about it, and I love the, it's Texas and it's surf, and there is surf in Texas.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know.
A lot of people don't know.
Okay. Let's shift gears, Brad, because I'm excited to talk to you about something that's very close to my heart, and you probably know where I'm going with this. This is the Sink Your Shucks oyster shell recycling program. For people who are watching this, they can maybe see our oyster shells sitting here next to us at the table. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about the Sink Your Shucks oyster shell recycling program, our partnership, and sort of how it all began in 2009.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you well know, I get a lot of credit for the Sink Your Shucks program, but it was you, Jenny, and Gail who put this thing together. And I've been along for the ride and stepping in front of that camera every chance I get. But,
well, you can't recycle oyster shells without oyster shells.
True
so
that.
You're an important part of the process.
True that. So the funny part of this is it all began with the upcharges on diesel fuel for our dumpsters back in 2007, 2008, and gas prices were high back then. And we were getting these ridiculous surcharges based on our weight. And I have a good friend, Dr. Joe Fox, who I walk with in the neighborhood periodically. And I will always tell everybody all my woes. And I was complaining about it, and he said, I think this is before I met you, Jenny. He said, an oyster shell in a landfill is a resource out of place. And for some reason, that resonated with me because I didn't, when you look at it as a resource, and then he went on to explain that, that baby oysters like to land on the shells of the mom and daddies and what the reefs provide in terms of environmental benefit, all that stuff. But that's really how it began. And then from there, I met you and I met Gail and, 20 acres worth of restored reef later or more.
40 plus,
40 plus.
Yeah, 40 plus acres of those recycled shells, most of them from Water Street, now are, back in the bay, creating homes for baby oysters and all the other critters that depend on those reefs. So it's been a real success. So can you talk to our listeners about the process? So how do we recycle oyster shells? Like, what does it actually mean on a day-to-day basis to recycle oyster shells?
So you order a dozen oysters at Water Street Restaurant, you consume them, and the busser clears your table. And then instead of going in the trash bins, back in the dish room and all that, those oysters go into a special bin. And so it's a little bit of a process for the restaurants. Not huge, but, it's an extra step. And then those oysters go out to bins that are out by our dumpster area. And those bins are provided by Texas A&M, Corpus Christi, Heart Research. And then and so they're big probably, I don't know, 800-pound capacity bins. I mean, reinforced by you guys. Yes. I mean, because they're heavy. Those things weigh a lot. And then periodically during the week, usually this time of year when business is slower, a couple times a week, and during the summer, 3 times a week, those bins are picked up by folks employed up till recently by Heart Research, and I guess still to some degree, those undergraduate kids that were big and strong and had no sense of smell would pick those entrepreneurial. That's right. Would drag those oysters onto a trailer, and then taken to an area provided by the Port of Corpus Christi. What you guys told me, what I learned in this process, is those oysters need to sit out for 6 months in a semi-quarantine to kill any critters or viruses or anything that's on them. And then from there, and the port, you got to give the port credit for this. I mean, they have the bulldozers and they push those into a pile, and I love those things, but they smell bad. They attract bugs in that quarantine.
Oh yeah,
that quarantine process. That takes some doing. And then there are events, bagging events or redistribution events. I don't know how you want to term it, Jenny, but those oysters, through your efforts, go back into the bay system, and they're not just willy-nilly dumped out there. And you can talk about this more than I can, but there's a rhyme and a reason for where and why and when those oysters go back into the bay.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's great for folks to hear behind the scenes what happens when their tray of shucked oyster shells gets removed from their table, that all of these steps are happening behind the scenes to get those shells back in the water.
Right.
But you're right. Once we take that pile of shells that's been sitting out at the Port of Corpus Christi, we basically have, now at this point, we have a pretty good understanding of the science of the environments where we want to put these shells back, and we put them back in the right places at the right times based on the data that we have available. And we've been very successful in terms of the fact, like you were saying, those shells then provide an attachment surface for the baby oysters, the younger generations, to cement themselves and then create new oyster reef. So it's a simple process. It's not like disassembling a battery or something like that. The shells that you pick up from the table are the same shells that go back in the bay.
Right. So here's what I love about it. A couple of things. One, it's a perfect closed loop recycling. You could very well be eating an oyster today that grew on the back of an oyster shell that was consumed 2 years ago and recycled back into the bay.
Oh, yeah.
You could very well be doing that. And the other thing is the community involvement. And you guys have just been heroes in this, in my opinion, because it's not just Water Street, and really it's not just Hart, it's the Port of Corpus Christi. And we had to talk to Port of Corpus Christi and to say, we got a bunch of stinky refuse that we want to dump on some of your property and ask you to maintain it. And then when you recycle them, that there's dozens of people that help in that. And you've got the photos in your media stuff that show people out there standing knee deep in mud, putting oyster shells back in. Right. And then so every one of those people that's involved in that process knows that those shells came from Water Street. So man, that's the best kind of top of the mind advertising you can have. And if you eat at Water Street, they're going to take care of, they're going to leverage your trash into next year's crop.
But it's just another way of creating those connections, right? Between people and the Gulf where we live.
And I just tell you, I think Ed Hart. I'm name dropping, but that's the kind of thing he envisioned, Jenny. And I can't put words in his mouth, but I just think that he knew that this area thrives, basically survives on the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a great time then. I have a quote of yours that I think that actually speaks to this as well, that, not every businessman in their portfolio of things that they're trying to accomplish in their life adds working with an academic institution or working with a research institution. So we have a clip from a video that you were part of for HRI in the last year. And in that video you said, I'm just going to read you back your own quote, when you live in a place because of its environment, you want to take care of that environment. How the Gulf of Mexico fared was how we fared in this restaurant. So my question is, with that kind of a philosophy, what led you to this interest in working with HRI and reaching out to A&M Corpus Christi to develop these deeper connections?
Couple things on that. It's just true. When there's a sargassum outbreak on the beaches, and I know that's a natural, but business drops. Okay, if there's a red tide in the bay, and our feeder markets are San Antonio, Texas cities, that news gets out there. So really, if the Gulf of Mexico is not doing well, neither is we. Neither is Corpus Christi, and neither are we. So that's one thing. I, like other people in this community, fought for expanded education opportunities in Corpus. And I am a minor player in that whole situation. But I believe very strongly that you don't just get out there and say, yeah, we need a 4-year university and a Gulf of Mexico institution. You then need to help it thrive. And that gulf that exists oftentimes between the education, the academic community, and the business world is something that I'm convinced we have to eliminate. And we've talked about it, Jenny. We've had all these great ideas, and nobody will throw money at us.
Where are those independent investors? Venture capitalists.
But I just think you can't just say, man, we need a business school out there, and then ignore the graduates that come out of that business school. And you can't say Heart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies is a wonderful thing, and then let you guys just be out here on an island without any connection to the community. And so I don't know. It wasn't any grand design. I just looked at it as a resource. So I don't know, Jenny. I go on forever. I believe in education. My daughter is a graduate of Texas A&M, of course, Corpus Christi. My friends. I never thought I'd have this many friends that have PhDs, but it's all like-minded folks, and our business. And not just Water Street restaurants, but the office supply companies and the retailers and all. Our business is dependent on this environment. It just is.
Yeah. Okay, so to pick up on our conversation about sort of the importance and the links between local businesses and academic institutions, research institutes like Hart, I do want to add that I think you're maybe selling yourself a little bit short in this in terms of the power of having business owners, the local community involved in what's happening at the university. And that's, we're an educational institution here at the university, but not everybody's going to come back and take a class. I mean, how many people come and take a class after they've graduated? So I think there's a real need for informal education off of the island. We're an island university, and we talk a lot about the need to get off of the island. So I think that information sharing and highlighting of what's going on and promoting the benefits of a healthy coast and healthy seafood and all of those connections is a really important role that you have played. You're an informal educator, we're formal educators, but they both play a really important role, I think, in understanding and creating local stewards out of our community.
I agree with that, and what you all have done, Jenny, you've recognized, and especially Dr. Miller, what happens in Corpus is important to the university too. So we need a vibrant downtown, and we need a sense of place that draws other people to our community, students, business people, retirees. And so it's not perfect, and everybody, everything's perfect on paper, and then you get all the humans involved. But, you all bought a building downtown last year. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, that's right.
Downtown Corpus Christi. And, the Texas Surf Museum is going to end up being, the archives of Texas A&M University. So, I mean, how cool is all that? And I'm just, I'm restaurants are highly visible generally in the community, and we serve all sorts. So me coming out and speaking to a university class, that's marketing for me. I mean, I love doing it or doing stuff like this, but, how many times are we going to say Water Street Restaurants in here or Texas Oyster Ranch when we get to it? And so,
That's right. But, I think people have always said, I hear people say all the time that Corpus Christi is either a small city or a large town, depending on where you're coming from and your perspective. Mm-hmm. So we're maybe 350,000 now metro area. So I think that each of these places and each of these opportunities to highlight these sort of jewels that we have in Corpus Christi are another way that, as you said, when students graduate from the universities, they want to stay in Corpus Christi. They feel like this is a place that gives them the things that they want out of their hometown and a place to put down their roots and start their family. So I think that all of these things, they're just so much more important because we're a small city, large town.
Well, Jenny, the thing that I got to ask a question not too long ago in a public forum is, what would you wish for Corpus Christi? And you know what I wish for Corpus Christi? Self-esteem. This is a cool place. And maybe it takes somebody who, was born in mineral wells and grew up and said, I'm working my way into the water to see it. But, it's not for everybody, but, neither is Chicago. And so
that's a good point.
And what you're seeing now, and I see it happening downtown, is people moving to Corpus Christi because they want to live here, and they can make a living here, and they can make a difference. And you see all those young people down there, and young business professionals, and all these groups. To me, the downtown business, the downtown management district looks like a bunch of seventh graders, but there is all these young people that are really stoked and enthused, and the university is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you said about not just coming here to make a living, but to make a difference. I think that's possible in Corpus Christi because of who we are. Okay, I'm going to ask you to shift gears again, but I know that this is something that a lot of our listeners will be interested in hearing you talk about. So let's talk about oyster mariculture.
Let's do it.
So the Texas Oyster Ranch, as you said at the beginning, oyster mariculture permit number 1 in Texas. Congratulations.
Thank you
I think
very much.
that's congratulations. So as we've talked about today, you are someone who is always willing to try new things. You're willing to kind of take the risk, to try to see if you can make something work, try new things. So I imagine that this is what also applied for you with entering the industry of oyster mariculture. So tell us about why you wanted to be an oyster farmer.
There's an element of truth to Richard was trying to get me out of his hair, and so because I kept hanging around those restaurants thinking I was the boss.
And this is Richard. I guess we should give some context.
Yeah, Richard Lomax, my son, who now runs all Water Street. So my older son has his own business called Bar Under the Sun, He and his wife Leslie, and then Richard. Richard runs the Water Street complex. My daughter is an educator, married to somebody with coastal bend, bays and estuaries. Adrian
that's
Hillman.
right. Yeah, strong roots in the community, Brad.
So Richard kind of asked me about this oyster miracles. He had seen something. And so like I always do in these situations, Richard saw something that piqued his interest because ever since the BP oil spill, our oyster supplies have been spotty. Mm-hmm. That's probably the best thing I can say about it. Anyway, and we have oyster in our name. We sell 500,000 oysters a year. So Richard kind of prompted me. So what I do in these situations, I go to Heart Research Institute, and Joe Fox and other people. There's a guy up the coast named Bill Balboa. All the people you know, Jenny, that kind of got me interested in this. And then I tell this story. Joe said, take 8 minutes of your life and watch a video called Gospel of the Alabama Oyster. That was probably 2016, 2017. And if you haven't seen it, take 8 minutes of your life. And it's just the story of how Alabama developed this new industry. It was everything those guys were doing and the people involved I loved. It was entrepreneurial. It was capitalistic. It had an environmental component that really was equal to the business side of it. And it was water people making a difference, working in their element, water. And so I saw that video, and then I went to Murder Point, Alabama, which is a guy named Lane Zerlot. Lane was very hospitable, and he showed me around.
Let you work for free?
Yeah, he was very hospitable. He didn't pay me a thing, worked my ass off. And so, that really, wow. And so why aren't we doing this here? Mm-hmm. And, there's a million answers to that question, but the real answer was because we haven't. The only state with a coastline that didn't do it. So I went with Joe and we went and talked to this. It was going to take an act of legislation to legalize this process, to legalize this industry. So we went and talked to Representative Todd Hunter, a longtime friend. And I can tell this story. I met Todd when he was fixing my wife's tickets because she is a lead-footed woman. And that's all the way back to the early 80s. So Todd says, he looked at it, and there were some other interested legislators, and after a period of reflection, he said, let's do it. He said, we're into the Texas legislature. This is 2019, and you have to throw all logic out the window and basically do what I tell you, and I think we can get this passed. And sure enough, we did. So the thing I love about it, Jenny, is that we started from, it's like, it wasn't even an embryo yet. It was still a gleam in the parent's eye, and we took it all the way through the legislative process. I mean, do you want me to go on?
Sure. So let's say, maybe this is a testament to your sort of stubbornness or willingness to run through walls to get something done. But I mean, not a lot of people, when they hear, well, this will take an act of the legislature, says, okay, I'll take on that. I'll take on that fight. So from 2017, having these early conversations to give us the more recent history. So now oyster mariculture is allowed in Texas.
I'm going to go through the whole stuff, and y'all can edit out what you don't want to hear. But the governor signed it into law on May 27, my wife's birthday, 2019. And then Texas Parks and Wildlife, who's the lead agency on this, had 15 months, had until September of 2020 to put the rules together. Well, I didn't know that, and that's a lot of. There's 5 state agencies involved, and coastal landowners, a lot of interested parties in this, and to their credit, Parks and Wildlife, and that's where I first met Emma. I hated Emma at that first meeting. she didn't say yes to all my wants and desires. So that they went through that whole process and came up with the rules and regulations to govern Texas oyster mariculture September of 2020. So then, only then could you go out and find a location. And man, Jenny, that was a bear. You have to be so many feet from an existing oyster reef. You have to be so many feet from an oil and gas operation, of which there are millions in our bays. You have to be so many feet from a bird rookery. Every landowner within 1,000 feet of your farm site has to give written approval. So, there are all these hurdles just to get to the location.
Let alone it being the right salinity, temperature, and everything to grow oysters, right? All these things come first.
The real meat of things, so to speak, is the science and the environment.
Yeah.
So, we went through all that. January of 2021 now, I guess we are, we made our application. And then you have to come up with the business plan. We were the first ones. And, I think it probably shouldn't be because for ego reasons, but it was important to me to be the first one because we dreamed this thing up for Texas. And we being you and me, by this time you're involved and this institution's involved and, we're having meetings here, all sorts of research going on. Yeah. Anyway, I got I have my permit number is 0001. And so we have the first cultivated oyster mariculture permit. We stocked our first seed in November of 2021, so a little over a year ago. And then the real learning curve, we did, I tell people it's like having food truck experience and opening a 500-seat restaurant. All of a sudden we said, well, we want a lot of oysters, so we bought 1.5 million. And, there's the learning curve of the first year was brutal.
Was steep.
Brutal financially.
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions about this specifically because I have a lot of questions about how this process has worked.
Okay.
So you're number one, you're permit number one, which means you are literally breaking new ground every day, yep. Building the plane as you're flying it, I'm sure. You're a pioneer, but there's nobody who's come before you in Texas. So I imagine you've taken a lot of information from visiting the oyster farmer in Alabama. I'm sure you've done all the research that you can before you get started. But so you have a permit, mm-hmm. You have a place on the bay where you can now begin your farming.
Right.
So tell us, what's involved in the farming process? What do you do first? Where did this, you mentioned that you put seed in the water. You didn't just sprinkle them in the water, right?
Right.
So to somebody who's never seen a picture of an oyster farm or seen a picture of your oyster farm, what does it look like? Where do the oysters come from?
One of the things we had to determine and actually switch in midstream was what was the, equipment that we were going to use. And we ended up, because of all the restrictions, we're in 7 to 10 feet of water in Copano Bay. So we use what is a floating cage system, which is essentially, it's like a big upside down cage with bags of oysters in it and floats on the top. So Texas has in their wisdom, I believe, has determined that you can't grow any oyster in Texas waters unless it comes from Texas broodstock. And so it has to be hatched from Texas broodstock. Well, that's well and good, but there are no hatcheries in Texas. This is the first. So we had to find an institution, in this case, Auburn University, and we sent Copano Bay broodstock, FedEx 200 oysters to the folks down there in Dauphin Island.
So these broodstock, let me just stop you. So these are the adult oysters from Copano Bay,
right?
Who can be the moms and dads of your babies.
Yep.
Okay. So they go to Auburn.
They go to Auburn on a airplane, and then Auburn spawns them. And I still not. I mean, I know the life cycle, but I don't know how you get an oyster spawn.
You change the temperature.
Yeah. Blue
you
velvet.
Play romantic music.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you're doing this because it's there's a lot to this process. So they spawned, hatched, and grew out to 6 millimeters, the size of the end of your little finger. Mm-hmm. About 1.5 million baby oysters. And then we drove down there in a refrigerated vehicle and picked them up and drove them back.
So how much space does 1.5 million baby oysters that are 6 millimeters look like? Does that take up a truck? Does that take up my coffee mug that's sitting here?
It's about, if you can imagine a restaurant bus tub, 2x3, something like that. It took 11 restaurant bus tubs filled about halfway up with baby oysters to bring them back. So, I would say you could, with all the seats folded down, you could probably stack 11 in a Suburban. Mm-hmm.
So these are itty bitties.
Yeah, they're tiny. Mm-hmm. And how do you know you're getting $1.4 million? Well, I mean, you do the best you can.
Trust.
Yeah, you trust. And then those go, and so you can imagine with a tiny oyster like that, they go in tiny mesh bags because those bags hold the oysters. And there has to be water flow through those bags because that's how the oysters feed. Mm-hmm. I'm telling the PhD in oysterology how it works. But so
you put them right into the bay in these mesh bags.
We put them right into the bay, okay. and it was a rough day. But we had to get them in the water. They can't at that age. They're like any other organism. When they're young like that, they're vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So we put them in, and then when you put them in this first stocking, there's probably 10 or 12,000 oysters per bag. You can put a lot of oysters in a small mesh bag. The problem is the damn things start growing. This is a reference you're too young
you
for.
You hope they start growing.
But if you've ever seen the I Love Lucy, where Lucy and Ethel have got the conveyor belt and the chocolates keep coming out, well, that's it. I mean, they grow, and you have to split them and you have to divide them up. So anyway, that's part of my learning curve. But so where are we? We've got them in the bay. We put 36 cages out there with 6 bags each, and each bag had, however many oysters in there to put 1 million plus oysters in the water.
So does 1 million plus baby oysters in the water mean 1 million plus plate-sized oysters at the end of the process? Or is this part of the learning curve to know how many are going to make it out the other end?
Historical, decent farm people who know what they're doing say that it's 10 to 20% mortality. Okay. So 1 million oysters should yield 750, 800,000 oysters. I killed 80%, and I'm not proud of that, but it just got away from us. And so as they grow, you have to keep dividing out those bags. And as you divide out the bags, you have to add more cages. And so all of us, and everything's exponential. So you go from 12 cages to 24 to 48 to 96. to whatever, and honestly, I should never, people told me this, but I know everything until I don't.
Now you do.
Now I do. Start small.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of investing in this thing with tons of enthusiasm. Hired a guy, we thought had the right experience, and we're selling oysters, so all the way around, all the mortality we experienced and the loss and all that stuff. We in July of 2022, we sold our first oyster that we've grown at Water Street Oyster Bar.
That's fantastic.
It is, and so,
next year will be easier. Knock on wood. Mm-hmm. And hopefully the year after that will be easier. And you're also, blazing a trail. So the folks who are going to start getting into the industry because they've seen your success and seen what has gone well and what has gone wrong, and those lessons that you share are also going to pay dividends, I think, for others and for the industry as a whole. So I wanted to just clarify one thing before we get off this topic, and that is about splitting the oysters. So, from the science perspective, my understanding of why you would go from many very tiny oysters in a bag to fewer very large oysters in the bag is because they're filter feeders and they need to filter feed their food out of the water. Is that the reason why you're splitting them, to give them ample food so they're not competing with each other so much for the water that's flowing through those cages?
Right. And they grow. And so if you don't, they'll bust out of those cages, literally split those bags with their growth.
Wow.
And the strong ones, the fast growers will crowd out the weak. And it happened to us, Jenny. I mean, I'm still dealing with bags that we did not have the right density in. And then you add, we had a really good spat set, which is another, some jargon, but the wild oysters, were pretty healthy this year in Copano Bay. So we had wild oysters clinging to our equipment out there. And the axiom in this business is flow means grow. And so anything that inhibits flow, whether it's overcrowding, too small holes, or other creatures getting on your mesh nets that inhibits flow,
that's a problem.
Means no grow.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, I feel like you've become this sounds like marine biologist training on the job, because you're seeing probably different seasons of organisms that are, like you're saying, they're spawning and then they're attaching themselves onto your gear. And I imagine that changes over the course of the year.
Exactly.
It's probably interesting, but also,
good handle on the health of the
work.
bays too.
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, we're out there every day, and I'm just, it's not always this way. Right now, Copano Bay is healthy. Water is green, and there's lots of organisms out there, and I had a great spat set. And I mean, literally, we could see the bottom in 8 feet of water earlier. What's this month? Or in December, we were out there, and you could see the bottom. So, I of course want to take credit for everything, but it's good to be able to say, it's good to be able to tell your customers in the restaurants, man, these are coming from this oyster tastes like Copano Bay.
Yeah. Well, so maybe this is, we have just a short period of time left. So, but I don't want to end this discussion without talking to you about one more thing. So a long time ago, we had a conversation where you used a phrase that I thought was so interesting. So lots of folks have probably heard these phrase, farm to table or field to table, or are aware that people are much more interested in knowing where their food is coming from, or buying their food from farmers markets and really supporting, eating what's local.
Sure.
And you used a term called bay to table, that you really had this bay to table philosophy. So I think that, I have questions about how you developed this bay to table philosophy, but the other part, which relates to what you just said, is that this also sort of goes into this foodie debate that you hear about wild caught versus farm raised seafood. So you hear about it for shrimp, salmon, and now I think we'll start to hear about it with oysters. But so talk to me about bay to table and how customers feel about eating a farm raised oyster that they know where it's coming from in the bay, that can have a local flavor associated with it because of the water that it grows in. Are you finding that customers appreciate farm raised, ranched Texas oysters as a bay to table sort of way of lifestyle of eating?
Yes, I do. I think one of the things that really got my attention years ago was it started in, I don't know what, 2010 or something. Conventions would want to know what not your environmental footprint, but what kind of environmental initiatives were involved in your community before they would book a convention. And that was new to me. And that was the farm to table. And then, of course, it just made sense to go.
Yeah, people have choices.
They do. And so I love the fact that we can say these drum were, caught by, Kenny down in the Laguna Madre, and so there's a story. If you can tell a story to your guests, it enhances their dining experience. So the difference between us and those other, and I think aquaculture and fish farming and shrimp farming is the future. It's just going to happen. But you have to feed those creatures. My saying is God feeds the oysters, and we just enhance that. So, our oysters live in exactly the same environment that the wild oysters do. They eat exactly the same food, and their body processes are exactly the same. All we're doing is kind of corralling them in an area, and in fact, pulling them off the bottom, which is a cleaner, more attractive product. You don't have all the biofouling. Oh, that's my word.
Well, I think that's actually something really good for listeners to hear about oyster farming or oyster mariculture, oyster ranching, is that these aren't being fed an artificial feed. They're eating phytoplankton from our bay waters, just like the wild caught oysters are. Okay, let's talk about how the Texas Oyster Ranch can provide opportunities, educate, training for people who are interested in getting involved in oyster mariculture in Texas. So are there opportunities for folks to get involved, to come out and spend some time turning oyster cages or schlepping oysters around? What could people do? Are there opportunities to get involved?
There are, and Jenny, we're building an industry here. Okay, so I prefer people who have strong backs and can get dirty, but can see the bigger picture. And yes, we're hiring. I need 2 full-time people right now. $40 an hour. 40 hours a week, $15 an hour, $40 an hour. Yeah. Don't tell Keith. And we need people right now. But if you're involved in marine biology or oyster mariculture, or you're looking for a part-time job that will enhance your education, come to us. Not only are we an enterprise and we have sales and we have profit and loss statements, you business students, but I've got 3 and probably soon to be 4 research projects taking place on the farm with Texas A&M AgriLife, Kirk Camerata here with A&M Corpus Christi. I'm talking to Michael Wetz with Hart Research Institute, and then NOAA. So this is part of our workday, is we got to go out and take samples for these folks.
That's great.
And so, and so let's build an industry.
So no experience needed in oyster mariculture. If folks are interested, we'll put some information on the Gulfstream podcast website. So if people want to get in contact with you, they know how to do that.
Please.
What about things like summer internships for students who are, looking for additional training or looking to even get in the water?
Please. I need help. I need like I said, strong backs and a willingness to get dirty with this. But I prefer people that have an eye to see where we're going. Jenny, just think about it. I mean, I heard in late last year that the global population hit 8 billion. So what we have right here is an opportunity to produce a delicious protein that enhances the environment. And we don't use the word sustainable out there. I think it's overused. We are restorative mariculture, because what we do is creating a food product that is consumable, desired and consumable, and in doing so, we improve the environment. I don't, is there anybody else that does that? Probably, but I don't know it. So let's do it. And so I can always use the labor, but I'd like to have the vision and the realization and the commitment to building an industry as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I love your comment about restorative mariculture. Mm-hmm. So, as we were talking about earlier, these oysters don't require you to put any feed in the bay, for example. Right. Just by adding these oysters in your cages, you're improving local water quality. They filter enormous amounts of water through their feeding activities. So they're really giving back as well.
The fishermen out there love us because they know what we're doing. The crabbers, the guys out there, crusty old Hoss the crab man out there, and that's a real person, says, I'm glad to see you guys out here. You're doing what's needed to be done in this bay for decades.
I mean, you're starting conversations that wouldn't be started otherwise. I mean, you're really showing what can be done in an industry that has not existed until, what did you say, January of, when did you put your first batch of oysters in the water?
November of 2021.
November of 2021.
November 5th.
Yeah. So, okay. I've learned so much from you about oyster farming. I was thinking that if I were 2+ decades younger, I might choose a different career. This sounds just fascinating and such a wonderful way to be in the water. So let's turn our eyes to the future now. Let's talk about some of the exciting things on the horizon. So we talked about the beginnings of Water Street. It's the 40th anniversary coming up for Water Street Oyster Bar, Water Street Restaurants. Can you talk to us a little bit about your plans for the future?
Well, honestly, Jenny and I've said this before, future's not in my hands. I mean, I want to be here for it, and I'm excited about it, but the future's in your hands, and the future's in Richard Lomax's hands, and the Texas A&M Corpus Christi student body and the grad students at HR. That's where the future is. And so, and I'm excited about it. And I hope, I don't want to, I've said it before, I'm a capitalist and I believe in business and I believe in providing jobs and I believe in profit. But I don't believe that is exclusive of taking care of your environment, taking care of where you live. And so what I see out there is more opportunities like this. I think the Port of Corpus Christi is doing a great job, and I'm not just blowing smoke, but they have, they deal with volatile substances, but they also deal with taking care of what we do and what we have. So I think the future is, I don't know. It's up to you guys. I think that we have problems, but we had problems 100 years ago when we couldn't get around the we didn't know how to fly. American ingenuity and youthful ingenuity will fix those problems.
And I think you do such a good job of acknowledging the contributions of others in Corpus Christi. You've mentioned the port several times, Ed Hart several times. I think that, and you as well, your efforts, all these groups have really planted the seeds, right? You're saying, I'll be here for the future, but I don't have to be the one who's kind of driving the bus in the future. I think the importance of what you've done in these other entities is sort of planting the seeds so that people who are coming behind you can see there is a way to develop businesses that also are supporting the environment. You've sort of shown that you have shown that it can be done. And so even if you're not the one who's going to continue all of that work and shouldering all of that in the future, I think it has opened a new door and maybe revealed a new path forward for people who feel that way and now see, I can make a difference, make a living in the Coastal Bend and also, create a better community for my family and for the people who live here. So I really appreciate that. Can you tell us
what a legacy that would be if that were to come true? Yeah. It would be amazing.
I think so. I think we're already seeing it come true. So one of the sort of celebratory events coming up that you have planned on the horizon is the Texas Oyster Roundup.
Right.
So when I think about the Texas Oyster Roundup, I'm thinking about a gathering to get people together to sort of celebrate all the things that we've talked about today. Can you tell us a little bit about your ideas for the Texas Oyster Roundup? What's this going to be?
Well, I think it's
what can we expect?
I think it's a celebration, and again, I'm not going to deny we want to get people on the grounds of Water Street Market. It's like we do with Surftoberfest, and so, but I don't know what it is, Jenny, and I haven't figured out why yet. There's a cachet around oysters. I mean, you say you're an oyster farmer, and man, you got 50 friends immediately, and you got to tell the story, which is great. So let's use this Texas Oyster Roundup, which is going to be a springtime celebration of Water Street Market and what we do, the product that we deliver, and educate people. We're going to have speakers like yourself and others, and we're going to have live music. So there's going to be a lot of components to it. But here's my dream. The Coastal Bend should own this new industry, Jenny. This started here, started in this building right here. And Todd Hunter carried the legislation, and we have the first oyster culture permit. Texas AgriLife is the first hatchery permit. This should be the Coastal Bend. And I'm not xenophobic, and I'm territorial, but we should own this. And so I think the Texas Oyster Roundup is another step in let's reclaim the oyster business. We all, I grew up coming down to Fulton and buying oysters, my parents buying oysters off the dock in Fulton. Mm-hmm. Well, we can do that again. Yeah. And we can do it with hatcheries and nurseries and oyster farming operations and, cage equipment manufacturing. Let's build this industry. So that's,
Yeah, it's great. And how, from my perspective, it's sort of like, how does Corpus Christi not have a seafood festival already to celebrate all these things that we're talking about that people appreciate about coming to the coast and eating fresh seafood? Right. So I love that this creates connections both to local businesses, but also, again, the importance of this bay environment to support this way of life. So I think it's wonderful. And we're hoping actually from HRI to have some sort of active restoration stations. We can get people involved who are interested in habitat restoration, bag up some of those recycled oyster shells we talked about at the top of the podcast, and really have people, put their fingerprint on some of those shells that are going back in the water to rebuild reef.
Once again, it's that community outreach. Yeah. It's you guys. It's, the recreational fishing community is going to be heavily involved, and so it's cool. I love it, and it's sometimes you go out there and your cage is sunk and you're dirty, and it's nice to hear and talk with you about the bigger picture and why I sometimes come home smelling like a bile-fouled piece of marine debris.
Marsh mud
marsh mud.
Well, so tell us before we finish here, besides the Texas Oyster Roundup this spring, is there anything else that's on the horizon for Water Street and Texas Oyster Ranch?
Well, I mean, Richard, my son, Richard Lomax is, the Lomax family is committed to downtown, and there's a lot going on. Richard's opening a couple of concepts down there, a bakery, and I think probably a Tex-Mex here pretty soon. Ben and Leslie are expanding bus, and they're adding a kitchen. We've evolved into the Texas Surf Conservancy. And Jenny, back at the Surf Museum, you and Jeff and this whole community out here, Paul Montagna, very helpful to us as we would develop speaker series and things. There's more to surf than paddling out on a board. It's hydrodynamics or, wave action and jetties and salinity and all that. So I think, for me personally, I think what you'll continue to see is a further commitment for my family to Corpus Christi, particularly downtown Corpus Christi, and I don't know. I mean, what's this industry going to look like in 5 years?
Yeah.
I'm not scared of competition. I want people to develop. We need more. We need 15 oyster farms, not 3.
So in your mind's eye, looking into the future, into your crystal ball, is there a time not so far down the road where we can go to Water Street and we can get a tasting platter that instead of having an oyster from the Pacific Northwest and an oyster from the Northeast, we could have a platter of different oysters coming from different bays in Texas that represent all the flavors of our coast?
Absolutely. I think we're starting that. I told you I'm going to Austin on Monday the 9th, and Hannah Kaplan, who's got the second oyster farm up there in Galveston Bay, and David Aparicio, we're going to have a side-by-side tasting up there with Copano, Galveston, and Matagorda. And so, and people love, the beauty of this whole thing is the Copano oyster is delicious. Talk about the health.
The Copano Uno.
The Copano Uno. It's number one. But that salinity that we've got now, we can talk about how the salinity went to 0 my first year. But people are asking for it. And so, we're already creating demand. And Richard doesn't want me to sell. Richard wants it to be like Coors beer. When we were growing up, Coors beer you could only get it in Colorado or someplace. So they have to come to Corpus to get the Copano Uno. So.
Yeah, I love that idea. I can already see the lines out the door. I mean, I feel like no one is going to love a Texas oyster as much as a Texan, but it's also going to be this idea of it really being something that is locally served as well is another one. Come visit our wonderful city and taste something that you can only get here.
Right.
I love the idea.
Well, tell Richard to pay up for the damn things. And he's beating me up on price.
That sounds like something to keep in the family. Okay. Well, Brad, thank you so much for spending all this time with me today. I've learned so much. We've known each other for such a long time, but I also just learned so much from hearing from you today. So thank you for that. And then for the listeners, thank you for joining us. And then please stay tuned for more episodes and possibly even more guest hosts on
I need people. I need a job. If you want a job, come see me. I will put you to work.
We're going to send them your way.
Right.
Yeah. Check out our website. We're going to put Brad's phone number on there.
More than a paycheck. You will get more than a paycheck if you work for us. I promise you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to The Gulf Stream. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help make a difference in the Gulf by contributing to the Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies research and efforts to create healthier coastal and marine ecosystems. Visit hartresearch.org. That's HARTE research.org for more information. Please note, the views and opinions expressed by guests of the Gulf Stream do not necessarily reflect the views of the Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies or Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. It is our mission to be an honest broker, providing only science-based solutions to Gulf of Mexico problems and other environmental issues. This podcast is intended to provide our guests with a safe and open forum for them to express themselves freely.